Welcome to the Intentional Man Podcast, a podcast that inspires and equips men to lead lives of intentionality and grow to their full potential. I'm your host, Jonathan McGinley, a life coach that helps men just like you create the life that you want and live a story of significance through my coaching and tools on intentionality. Thanks for joining, and welcome to the show. All right, welcome to the show. I am excited for you to be here and really excited to have a great friend, Aaron Everitt, on the call today. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm great, man. Good to see you. Always fun to chat with you. Love being around you.
For sure, man. Well, thanks for joining us and for being a part of this podcast. Aaron is a serial entrepreneur. This guy, anything he can get his hands on, he seems to get his hands on, and has built a lot of different successful businesses. And so just a guy that I've really just admired and looked up to in a lot of ways. And he just has a great perspective on business and finances. And he's been in kind of the real estate game and other businesses that have nothing to do with real estate, kind of all over the board. But we're going to kind of talk about finances today, and just his mindset with money and some of his practices and habits, and hopefully leave you guys with a lot of value today. So you ready to do this, Aaron?
Yeah, let's do it. It sounds great.
All right, man. Great. So first of all, I would just love to hear like your mindset about money, like the purpose of money. What comes to mind when you're asked that question?
So I'm a person of faith. So, I mean, we're sure that's been a conversation on here a lot. So, but my take is that money is a tool to help my fellow humans. So I look at money as it's just a vehicle. I never have put too much emphasis on it. I grew up in a family around here that was fairly prominent. And we had a lot of we had a lot of assets. We had the mall. We did a lot of development. We've been involved in Northern Colorado for almost 100 years as different entities or iterations of my family, I guess. And so I've always come from a place that I knew we had some assets as a family. I got involved in our family business, so then I got to understand that at a deeper level. But I have never once looked at money as something that I wanted to obtain. I know I need it. I know I need it to feed my 4 teenage boys at my house, and I seem to need it more of it all the time to feed those kids. But I've always looked at it as it's very much a tool, and it's very much a tool to help other people. At the heart of capitalism, which is the system we live in, I feel like that is, in essence, service to one another. I have something that you need. And if I provide something really well to you, you're willing to part with your green earned money to give it to me. And the same is true, but that requires service. That requires me to serve you. And we have to mutually agree that what I'm doing for you is worth what you're willing to say your labor is trading for me. So I look at it very much like this is an important part of life together. This is really an important part of living in our world together, that if I don't serve you well, then money is just something to be obtained. It can have all the connotations of evil around it. It can have all the greed and the stuff that comes with it. I try to look at that very differently and say, if I don't look at this as something in a way to serve others, then it really isn't. It's of no value to me then.
Yeah. Wow, that's really good. Has that, you mentioned growing up in a family like that, was that kind of your family values? Has this always been kind of your mindset, or has that morphed or grown over time?
I hated actually growing up here because when I was a kid, our name was on a lot of things like real estate companies and buildings, and I just didn't like it at all. Actually, I was very uncomfortable with it. I didn't have any interest in that being a part of what defined me. So I left and went to Canada to go to college. To get as far away from here as I could go. And so, yeah, my family probably had those values in there. Like we definitely we weren't showy people by any stretch of the imagination. My dad's not a showy person. My family, my mom, my grandpa, my grandma, they were not showy people at all. But I just felt like I didn't understand, even though we weren't showy people, our name was everywhere. So it was like, I'm not really reconciled to this and I don't like it. So I left And I found some friends that actually started to embrace me, for my musicianship, for my just kind of wit and humor. And they were my friends, and they had no idea what my background was. And so then when we started doing stuff, we were traveling and playing on the road, I ended up being the guy that was really in charge of getting the tour together. And I had to kind of become good with money, but I really quickly learned that whole situation was about service to other people. Like there was I was serving my friends who were riding around in the car with me, and we were having fun and we were having a great time. That was really fun for us to do. But also when we would play our shows or concerts or whatever, there was this whole transaction that was happening between us and the audience. And I just that's where I kind of really learned about money and what did it mean to me? Because up until that point, it just was this kind of awkward thing that I had to deal with, and I didn't really care for it. So,
yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And so you're in college and you're touring around and everything. You're handling the money. I guess in that situation, you probably didn't have as much money as you did when you were growing up, and so you're living differently, frugally. Did you really learn how to manage your personal finances well at that time? Was like the first time you had to really take ownership of that?
Yeah, I had a $500 Visa card that I'd gotten in college. That was my credit limit, was $500.
Okay.
And so we didn't, and it might as well have been 5 million because I didn't have $500 to pay anybody anything. Yeah. So I had to learn how to use that. I did every night when I'd get off, when we'd finish the show, this would be whatever time it was, go back to where we were staying, whether that was a friend's house or we were staying at a hotel or whatever we were doing. And I'd get out the books, and it was basically a ledger I had bought at Target. And I'd take the receipts from the day for the gas, for the food, for the different things, and I'd put those all in an expense column, and then I'd put an income column together. And then back then we weren't taking credit cards or anything. It was all cash or checks. So you were trying to figure out how to balance all this stuff and put it together. And then I would know, it's kind of a funny story. My buddies and I still laugh about it a lot. But there was one night we finished a show, we got to where we were going, and I'm like, we have $5 for dinner for all of us.
For all of us.
Yeah, for all of us. And so we went to the gas station because that I thought might be the best place to get dinner for at least 5 or 4 of us. And my buddies came back in to the car, and they bought a 3-foot tall alien cup full of Pepsi. And that was the $5. And they thought I was joking. And I'm like, well, that's dinner. So.
That's dinner. It's the life of a musician, man.
But I loved it because it really taught me a lot about, look, saving is important, but also that story is actually illustrative of what happens, because I thought it was funny, right? It was like money was just this kind of thing. And did we go hungry that night? Yeah, but we had a good laugh about it. We have a great story that came out of it. Yeah. Our friendship got deeper, and there was a lot of things that happened out of this silly $5 alien cup that I feel like those lessons are really valuable. And I think that started my sense of I want to use money to live generously. I don't have any sense if I take it with me, I can't. So I also, I want to be good to people around me. I want to live a way and that time was really kind of when it started for me, was that I wanted to live it in such a way that when somebody would ask, hey, I need money. Mm-hmm. And I need it for something, or I need it to try something, or I need it to do a business or whatever. I always wanted to be the person that could give that money to them, or loan that money to them, or do something so that they could get from where they were to where they wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think we've talked about that on the show some, of just having a greater vision for your life and a greater vision beyond just the material and beyond just the things that are, that you desire. And so I love that. And that's why I asked you to be on the show, because I've seen that you've modeled that very much, of being very generous, and it's been something that I really admire. So for somebody who is in a place where they're in college or they're young adult or whatever, and they don't have a lot of money, but they want to use money as a tool to serve people, how do you develop that when you don't have a lot? How do you start that journey of saying, I want to be generous, I want to serve, just in a young age, or in a poor, or not poor, but where you don't feel like you have a lot of excess?
Well, I mean, it sounds a little cheesy, but goals are certainly something that you want to put out there.
Yeah.
I never put a number on that. I never said I want to be a millionaire or I want to be, that was never part of what I did. But I always felt like, look, if I want to be, if that was what I want to be, because I feel like that's how in the society we live in the United States of America, and I'm a Christian. So if I'm going to try to reconcile all these things together, what's the best way for me to do that? Well, it's probably going to be through generosity. It's probably not going to be through, I'm probably not going to find myself in the middle of hardship, in poverty. I'm not going to be in that setting. But if that means that, if that's the case, then that means that whatever is my station, I need to be really good with that. I need to be really open to that. And so that's kind of where it started for me, was set a goal, say that I wanted to be that kind of person, that that's the kind of faith and sort of, I don't know, just the kind of life I wanted to live. Set that out there. And I think, it's really easy. And I think when I was young, it was really easy to do it, to go in two directions. One was overspend and I remember getting my first credit card and like, hey, great, it's free money, kind of felt you know, and you go do it. And then you realize these guys are going to call me and they're going to like ask me to pay this back. And if I don't pay it, I don't like this feeling. It's going to be really annoying. And I didn't want that. The other side of it is really tempting too, to just be like, well, I'm just going to hold on to everything I get, because if I do that, then, I'll gain wealth. And I just think there's just a fine way through that. You got to be responsible with what is yours, but that has two sides to that responsibility. One is related to generosity, and one is about not just self-service. If I have money, I shouldn't just serve myself with that money. I should probably do something with it. But I also can't just do fun things for me because I have it. I think you have to kind of walk that line, and it's not easy to do. But I think if you set that out there, that's how you want to be and who you want to be, it definitely makes a difference.
That's so good. Yeah. And I love that vision, because it's bigger than yourself. And, you got a clear vision when you were younger of, this is the kind of person I want to be. I want to be a generous person. And then you set some goals and then you start pursuing it. So like to be intentional on a daily basis in terms of building towards that goal of being generous, then I'm curious of where you started then. So you're coming out of college, and you're like, I want to be the guy who's able to be the generous one, who's able to fill the needs. I think your motives were great. Your vision was great.
Yeah.
How did you do it? Where did you go from there?
For me, and this may not be the case for everybody, but for me, I wanted to take the gifts of who I am, which I think everyone that meets me would say I have no risk meter. Like, it's totally broken. As Dave Ramsey might talk about, like, I don't have a risk meter. It doesn't function. It's flatlined. There's nothing there that I'm not willing to try. But the other piece of it was recognizing that I think most people that also know me would say I'm one of the more creative people they've ever met, in that I have a broad spectrum of stuff that I look at, and I see the world through very creative eyes. And I took those two things and said, okay, well, that can serve me well. I never sat down and said, when I want to be a political science major or a marine biologist, I never said any of that stuff. When I went to college, I actually didn't know what I wanted to be. And back in my time, you could go to college and not just be overwhelmed with debt to your eyeballs, right? So I felt like college was a good chance to kind of explore some of that space, but the schooling portion of it was frankly useless. Like, I have a theology degree. I don't do much with that anymore, other than I'm in the church. I serve the church, try to mentor younger guys, do stuff like that. But I don't have any, I don't sit down in the morning and like, how did I use my theology degree today? It isn't like that. So I kind of went and figured out that those talents were there, that creativity was really the core of what I wanted to be. And then I said, that's cool. I'm going to try to use that to maximum potential. So I don't really care what the job is. It doesn't matter to me if I'm digging ditches or if I'm, if you ask my family, my immediate family, my wife and my kids, they're always like, you have done more things in our lifetime together than most people do, like 10 lifetimes.
Yeah.
And there was kind of a funny moment. We were driving around in our car, and my wife was like, "Hey, let's name all the things you've done since we've been married." And we kind of started doing that. We got to the end of it, and my oldest son in the back was like, "Don't forget the trailers." And it's this funny moment because we actually had a business for a second where we rented out campers and we tried to do this whole VRBO thing with campers. It turned out to be really successful, but it was almost like an afterthought in my head. I didn't even remember that I had done it because it was just, it was part of what I like doing. It was a creative solution. I'm totally ambitious towards those things. It doesn't bother me at all to be ambitious. It's another funny story from college, but we were doing a Christmas program and the choir teacher said, "Does anybody in here play bass?" And I had never picked up a bass, but I'd played guitar. I said, "Yeah, I do. Absolutely, I do." And then she said, "Oh, can you play a stand-up bass?" I said, "You betcha. You bet I can." And then she said, "Can you bow a stand-up bass?" And I said, "It might take me a minute to brush up on that, but I'm sure I can do that." And I did. I ultimately ended up doing all that in the concert. And it's just sort of an illustration of like, don't limit yourself. I think that's one of the things that I find amongst people my age and younger is that we just build these self-limitation ceilings on our world because it feels too scary. We don't have the money. We can't do what we want to do. And so we just stop ourselves before we ever get started. Somebody told me once there is a great idea born every 15 seconds, but it takes somebody to move that idea somewhere to get off the couch and do it. And that's very rare. And especially amongst our generation and younger, my generation and younger, I should say.
Our generation.
We just don't get off the couch. And so I think that's something that has served me really well to say, I'm going to get an idea. I'm going to try it. I've failed. Like I have actually failed miserably in my life on that stuff to the tune of numbers that I don't even want to talk about failure kind of thing in terms of dollars. But at the end of the day, I'm alive. I've got 4 amazing kids. I got an awesome wife. I get to play music still. I get to do things with interactions with people and friends and all of that stuff that failure is just, it's not something to be afraid of, even if the number's tremendous. I mean, even if the cash that gets, and it might be easy for me to say that because of who I am and where I've come from, but I just don't think failure is something that we should be so terrified of. And yet that's how most of us live.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Which is so true. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that keep people from reaching that vision. Like you talked about is that fear of failure, the fear of the unknown, the fear of getting started, what other people may think. Fear can be a big driver, and even the fear of losing money. Like I love that you kind of mentioned that there's the two sides of being openly generous and giving, or just spending it on whatever you want, and then also just saving it, being so frugal. But both of those can be, if they're rooted in fear, they can be in an unhealthy spot. And it sounds like you've kind of found the middle there. You said some really good things, I think, in terms of getting started. As I'm listening to you, started first with kind of a vision of the person that you wanted to be, not even necessarily the number, just the person that you wanted to be. Then you looked at your gifts, your skills, your talents, what you were good at, and you kind of went from there, which is really cool. So you got the vision, you got the gifts. So that applies to any of us, even if we're not, the creative, risk taker that you are. It's I can take that and say, all right, what are my gifts, and now let's get creative that way. So
the world needs accountants too. I mean, for real. Like,
exactly.
Some people are just really good with numbers, and we need that too.
Yeah, for sure. So I love that. Those are 2 really good steps to getting started. And then in terms of, let's just camp on this fear of failure thing here for a second, because I think this is such a big one. So I guess, what are some of your biggest failures, regrets around money? And then what did you learn from them? And was it worth the risk you took?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things I'm most, money itself. So one of the biggest failures I had is, like, we started a business as a manufacturing business. We had this kind of barnwood application that we did, and everybody in the world saw it and thought, that was the coolest product. What an awesome, it's a home run. You're going to kill it. So we went out, bought a factory, bought all the machinery, hired employees, got a sales team together, started doing everything. And every month, it didn't matter what we did. At the end of the month, we were writing checks. And we did that. I did that for like 5 years to the tune of probably $750,000.
Wow.
Of just writing checks. And it was really awful. I probably wasn't responsible. I wanted the dream to work so much that I wasn't nearly as responsible as I should have been.
Yeah.
With the money. But I also started to resent what was happening. And so I was in partnership with my cousin on it. And it's one of those things that was really hard for us to both walk through. But it's also, on the other side of it, it's one of my largest disappointments about money, but it's also one of the best things that ever happened to us, because what I'm most proud of is that I still have a relationship with my cousin. Wow. I still love him to death. He's one of my best friends in the world. We still laugh a lot, and we worked our way through this tumultuous deal that we both were on the hook for things. I was writing the checks because I actually had the funds to do it, but he was signing up for that debt. So I was putting him into that hole too. And for him to be gracious, me to be gracious, and for both of us to kind of get to the other side of that and go, what matters most here is how we solve this problem so that we can go to Thanksgiving and Christmas and still, really more than that, be friends, be the friends we are. Those are kind of two sides of the same coin. One was maybe the most disappointing thing I've ever done with money, but also I put my family in a really goofy spot. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff there that just probably not the brightest moment of my life with money. But on the other side, it's also one of this really brilliant moment for me in terms of how did I not let that dominate the rest of my life? Wow. How did I not resent people? How did I not resent the moment, the situation? I got super mad at our sales team to the point where I didn't want to talk to them anymore. I didn't really want to do anything. I've reconciled that with that leader of that team. We're good friends again. And there's stuff there that I just, as hard as that is, and as hard as that whole season was, we came to the other side of it. We found our way through it. We found a new avenue to make money and generate money and employ a bunch of people and do really cool things with our talents. But it's not like most people don't just wake up one morning and go, I think I'll be successful, and so I will be. Like there's a lot of that stuff especially in, you're in the podcast space, so you know how many people are actually trying to say that to people. Like if you just wish it happens, and you got to manifest your vision, and that makes it sound like it's all too easy, but it's not. It's not easy at all. And you're going to have bumps and bruises and heartache and hurt. And especially around money, it's very easy to get there. It's very easy to get covetous of it. It's very easy to make that the priority, dominate your life with it. That's all I want is money. That stuff is, that's just where I think we have a responsibility then to take a step back, recognize what's actually going on with money, and do something with it that's positive. It's beneficial to somebody else. And then for me, I had to ask, how am I going to serve my cousin in this moment? How am I going to do this in a way that isn't going to just lead us down a path of resentment? And he had to do the same thing. And I admire that both of us were able to do it, that we are still the best of friends out of the deal. Because I think that a lot of people would look at that situation. And I had people around me telling me at the time, like, you're getting this whole thing, everybody's taking advantage of you and the whole thing. And I never felt that way. And I never thought that even if I lost everything out of that whole deal and we never got any of it back, it wasn't going to define my future.
Yeah, that's huge. Well, and I think what you just said there at the end is so big in terms of you had the right mindset the whole time of this is going to serve my cousin, because you could have easily at any point just said, hey, I'm going to make this about me. And I can't imagine you'd be in the same place that you are now. If that was your vision, if that was your goal of I'm just going to make as much money as possible and that's the only thing that matters to me, then you'd be in a lot different spot. But because you had that vision and that mindset of, hey, I'm just going to do this to serve others, it enabled you to come out of that situation learning a lot with a deeper relationship with your cousin, which is so cool.
I just think it's really interesting that that's something that we're sort of taught along the way as people, that we should have a big, hairy, audacious goal, and it probably should have a number around it, and it should probably be these other things. If that was the case, then all I would have ever done is be worried about, did I get my money? Did I get my number? Did I get where I want to go? And now I look at it and I'm like, man, that money is kind of inconsequential. I learned a ton. I got better at who I am. I learned to be generous in the midst of that moment too. Like it's pretty tough when that's all going on and you're starting a church and the church needs some funding, and you're like, and you go, well, I still want to do this, still want to be a part of this, and to hoard that and to say, well, I'm not going to give my time or energy or talents to this or my money to this. It's, I think that temptation gets there because you just get too focused on what the number is. And I just think that's really financial stuff. It's easy to get focused on the numbers because they're numbers, but you got to see the forest through the trees on that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and what a cool just perspective on it, of having a vision of the person that you want to be with money more than the amount of money that you want to make. I just think that's really cool, because then, you can be content in any situation. And it's always there serving a higher purpose than just yourself. So I love that. The question that I would ask in follow up to that then is, because I think I've experienced the opposite of, not wanting to go after material things, not wanting to, chase riches, and then I play small, or I don't really pursue things to my full potential. I don't really try to be as successful as I could be, in the sake of like maybe a false humility or out of like I don't want to chase riches. So how do you kind of balance the two and find that sweet spot of not just chasing after possessions, but also not like just playing small and not making any money? And like, where do you find yourself in the middle there?
Yeah, I'm not a stuff guy. I'm always reluctant to spend money. People always give me a hard time about our friends give us a hard time about like, why wouldn't you just go buy a guitar if you want a guitar? Or why wouldn't you? And so I'm not really, I don't find my temptations towards those things, right? I don't find my temptations in material things or stuff, but I'm not averse to doing, I'll go spend money on a business tomorrow, and it'll be a lot, and it'll be too, like, everybody will go, what are you doing with that? So just because I don't want guitars doesn't mean I don't have those same battles of like, how do I resist this stuff? I think more than anything, again, it always comes down to me like, well, what will this do? Will this serve somebody? Will this give benefit to someone? Can I employ people by doing this and they get a job? And then if they have a job, then that means they get to go to Target or Chick-fil-A, and then that person at Chick-fil-A gets to take their money and there's this great invisible hand that continues to work through our system. And so I kind of always approach it from that perspective. The fear of playing small, I think it's a habit that you get over, because I think it's really easy to play small, like most people do. But what's weird about the people that I've met that really play small in life also really like things. So they have this tendency, and this is generalization, so take this with a grain of salt. But most people that play small also really like to drive a fancy truck. And so they equate the scorecard of driving a fancy truck or having the next great pair of shoes or whatever that is obtaining, that's succeeding at their goals. And so, but then if you ask them like, hey, do you want to grow as a person? Do you want to do you actually want to build wealth, or do you want to just like buy gold chains and be rich? Like, those are two very different things. Being rich is like, that's what you see on TV, right? Guys that go out and they'll go blow their money on stuff. That's rich. Wealthy is something totally different. That's where you're using your assets, your time, your talents, all the things you've leveraged to do something with it and grow that into something else for somebody else. for their use, or for the betterment of your community, or for the betterment of your church, or whatever. You're trying to do something in that it's a mover. Like, it moves the needle. Wealth moves the needle. Being rich doesn't do anything other than just satisfy yourself. And I think if I looked at those two things and said that they were different, then that's certainly how I've looked at life. Like, I don't want to buy the guitar, even if somebody wants to always make me buy the guitar. Even if that was the case, like, I don't want to do it, because I know that if I could take that same amount of money and do something over here that might move the needle a lot more, that's way more in line with who I am. And so then it becomes really easy. It's really clear cut at that point. You go, well, yeah, this is just an indulgence. And maybe every once in a while I just want to indulge. But for the most part, I'd want to take that same amount of money and move the needle this way, towards my fellow man, towards building a legacy of stuff down the road that people would look back and be like, man, I worked for that guy. He was great. Or that was the best job I ever had. Or working around that guy I was just different when I was done working for him. Or when I've known him as a friend for my whole life. And if I didn't know that guy, everything about my life would be boring without knowing him. Those kinds of things are the statements and sentiments that I want somebody to talk about at my funeral, not whether or not I had a bunch of stuff or houses in the mountains or any of that stuff. I want somebody to talk about and remember me at my funeral as a guy that made a total difference in how they got to move their own needle.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah. And just what an amazing perspective to have. I don't always think of it that way, of you're trading the guitar, quote unquote, for that legacy, like, I don't think we think about that a lot. Of it's just, hey, this is something I really want to have, but it actually could be taking away from the legacy, the person that you want to be remembered as. So I love that you kind of said that, of like, that's how you view purchases of like, and I'm sure, there's the things here and there that you do buy, and that's fine. We're not saying never do anything like that, but having that kind of perspective of, is this purchase, is this thing going to get me closer to who I want to be and the vision that I want to have for my life? So you have this big picture, and I wanted to talk about that because I think that's a big thing that people wrestle with, is kind of this short-term view on money, of let me just purchase the things now that are going to make me happy. Let me purchase the things now that are going to make me look rich. Let me purchase the things now, even if I don't even have the money. It's a big temptation right now with credit cards and everything to just buy things now that are kind of immediate gratification. How do you fight against that? And I mean, you kind of just hit on it, but talk to me about your long-term perspective on money versus the short-term.
Yeah, I guess, it's kind of funny. Like, I think about things that when I do spend money, and if it's a bit indulgent, we travel a lot. So like, I love to travel, but I love to travel for some altruistic reasons too. If we're out someplace new, my kids are learning something different. There's something, every experience offers something there. So we can be a bit indulgent in those spaces. I love food. I love good food. So I like to eat good food. I'm more than happy to spend money on food, probably certainly to this stage of my life, to my own chagrin and detriment. But that's the kind of stuff that I feel like it's okay to have those kind of things in your life. Like, it is still life. You should live life and live it well, and do it in such a manner that you enjoy it, because I think that's part of what God's also given us. It's not this, I don't actually believe that we're supposed to just beat ourselves on the back about how disappointing we've been to God or to other people or our family or anything like that. I think we need to be much more open to the idea that life is about doing some things that you can enjoy and have fun at. But I also think, like, when that crosses over into this sort of self-indulgent, all I really want is to have my own satisfaction out of every moment that I live, then you've stopped thinking about money in terms of your fellow man. And when you do that, every time you stop thinking about money in terms of somebody else, your temptation's always going to become back to self-service, and that is addictive. I just want to serve myself. I just want to fill my own bucket. I want to keep doing that. And you start to just dismiss all the people along the way that you could do better with and serve with. It doesn't mean you have to give them money. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that you might use that money for something that helps them or benefits them or services them or gives them a job or, does help them out in a moment that they need help. That's okay. It doesn't have to be this. I don't look around and be like, who can I write a check to today? That's not what I'm saying either. It's really more of when the moment comes and I'm asked, I just want to be ready to be able to do it. And that means that I have to be protective of my own self-indulgent tendencies, which is just fill my own bucket and do that over and over and over again, because that's what I want. I want to be able to do something different and help other people move themselves down the road.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, you just have that amazing attitude and just kind of principle of, is this going to serve others or is it not? And it sounds like that's kind of how you filter the short term versus the long term, which is great.
Yeah, totally. And really, short-term stuff is fun. Like we go to Disneyland or whatever. Probably too many times, but at the same time, and that's short-term, right? I also have never wanted to sacrifice the long-term for the short-term. So I've never wanted to say, I'm going to miss this moment that is right in front of me that I may never have the chance to do again, because I got to make sure I've got all this protected down over here. Somewhere along the way, somebody told me, if you can't do it again, you should do it now. And I think that's, it was probably in the context of something like a funeral, and you had to make a choice between going to a funeral or going, doing something else that was related to business or whatever. And the question was, well, are you going to be able to go do that funeral again? And you're not. So you should go do that. You should go be a part of that. You should go participate in that and let that kind of moment, never miss those moments that can't be recaptured. And especially as a dad, I have lots of stuff around that can get a little bit regrettable. Like, I don't want to miss these things with my children, even though, because they eat a lot of food and we need to have housing and we got cars and gas and places to take kids, that's going to consume some of that money. And so I have to go work. I have to do things to earn those dollars. I also don't want to take that for granted when I have my children and we have the opportunity to go do something. Just a couple of weeks ago, we went skiing. It was in the middle of the week. We're in the middle of a move. So it's a total wreck. Neither house is done. We're still trying to fix one, still do the other one, move into the other one. And the snow's coming and my dad wants to go skiing with us. We probably ought to go skiing. And because I don't want to miss that time with my dad. He's turned 72 this year. I don't want to miss that. And I don't want my children to miss that. But that means that at some level, I'm going to have to, you're going to make those choices between short and long-term things. And I never want to sacrifice the short-term opportunities for unique moments that are going to change my perspective or trajectory for the long term.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you kind of just, clarified that, because I think that's great. And I think it still goes right along with your vision of serving other people and being about other people. It's like, we're not saying short term is bad in terms of doing experiences and things now.
Right.
I think the distinction you just made was, you were talking about self-indulgent things, excess things of that nature in the short term that can end up biting you in the long term, but not forsaking the short-term moments with the people that you love and opportunities with people that are important to you because you're so focused on the long term. Because I think that's a big temptation too for us people who are naturally savers, is to just miss a lot of really cool opportunities and moments now because we're just only thinking about the long term. So I'm glad you kind of brought that up.
It kind of goes back to that beginning thing we talked about, right? Like, there are two sides to every coin. You can't hoard it and hope that that's where you put your stock, and you can't just blow it. There's this balance between those two things. I definitely know I need to save some money for things and the future and opportunities that might come up to help other people. But I don't want to do either one of those. I don't ever want to hold either one of those out of proportion with each other.
Yeah. Really, really good. And I would love to just kind of leave our audience with just some kind of practicals. So let's just say, what lessons are you passing on to your kids in terms of finding that right balance and in terms of being really responsible with money? What are some of the practicals and the lessons that you would say, hey, this is where you start to begin this journey?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm very good at it yet with my kids, but I think mostly I just want to try to. I think most of our education as people, if we're going to get better as people, comes from the chance to interact with one another and watch somebody else do it. Right. I want my children to see those things. I want them to see who I am and how I've kind of modeled myself in that direction. So that's probably the highest value that I have around it for my kids, is that I want to show it and demonstrate it, which is kind of natural because I'm already living that way. But a huge component of it is my wife and I are on the same page often about those things. We have, in 20 years of marriage, most of the time we're like, it's really funny how it works. We'll both be like, well, how much money should we give to the church or whatever in this building program or whatever they wanted to do, or this person that just needs help. And we'll kind of sleep on it. And the next morning we both usually say about the same number, which has been cool that we're both, and she comes from a totally different background, comes from a farming background in Alberta, doesn't have the same story I have. And so I think our family has sort of modeled this idea that you do these things. You live as generously as you can. You try to help where you can. You try to be in front of people when you can do it. And I hope my kids have learned that and watched that happen.
Yeah.
I think they also know that, hey, if we need something that makes life a little bit more rich and valuable to you, I never want to make that the idol. Like I don't ever want to stop that from happening. I also want to make sure they know that we're spending that money and that's going to come at a sacrifice. That's going to come at my time or their time or whatever to make that happen. I want them to know that, but I never want them to feel like, then again, we turn into idol worship of the thing. I really want this thing. And so we're going to just spend all our energy to try to get the thing. And then that just is really easy to just sort of sucker into and go, well, that's all that matters. So I hope my kids are seeing that. That's what I'd like them to take away. I think when people if they're listening to this and they're like, well, I don't even know where to start on this stuff. I think that cast a vision of what you think money is. Ask that question. I mean, I think that's really the biggest thing. What is money to you? Yeah. Is it something that you covet? Is it something that you want? Is it something you're going to pursue? Is it something that's going to drive you and motivate you? Any one of those things, you have to define around that. What is that? And if it's any one of those things that I just named, you might want to reassess what money is, because it's not those things. It's a tool. It's a tool of service for other people. And if you can do that and recognize it and move in that direction, then all those other things it becomes such a clarifying line in the sand. You just know how to make your decision about what you're doing with money because of that.
That's so good. Well, I'm really glad you said that too, because we can get caught up in all the tips and tools and practicals and everything. But if your mindset, if your view, if your attitude towards it is off, or you don't even know what it is, then it's going to be, which a lot of people probably don't. Like, I mean, it's not a question we typically get asked, like what your mindset is about money. But you had such a very clear answer to that right away. It's like, this is something that you've thought about and something that's dictated a lot of your decisions so that you can be really congruent with who you want to be. So I love that. It's like you started with, you knew what your mindset was, you knew what your vision was, you knew who you want to be, you knew you wanted to be a generous person. And that's dictated a lot of your decisions and helped you to overcome failures and bumps and things along the way because you've stayed true to who you are as a person and where you're trying to go. So I think that's a huge distinction.
Somebody described it as like when you live your life by first principles. Like what are the things that when you strip all the things away and all the noise and the nonsense and everything else, what is the principle behind all of it? And if you are always moving back to that, kind of moving and calling yourself to that, then all the decisions become really clarifiable. They're very easy to make because you're not stuck in this, well, I don't know what to do. Because the principle tells you what you should do. The principle, your values around what money and what the principles are around money, those values define then every decision that you make. And that just is that's a much easier place to live than like, oh, I have this dilemma. What do? I could spend the money on this, or I could spend it on that, or I could do that, or I could save it, or I could do. If you're able to see that line in the sand, it's much easier.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's great. And what a great place to kind of wrap it up. One question I would just ask you of living this life of generosity, holding your money loosely and doing it in the service of others. Like, has it been worth it? And I know, but I think that's a legitimate question in terms of like, we know we should be generous, but it's hard to be sometimes. So for you, like, what is the joy that you've found in living a lifestyle of generosity?
There's so many stories along the way that you hear about different people that needed something, and so at the time you didn't think anything of it, right? You didn't. They needed it. You said yes. I said yes. My wife said yes. Whatever it was, and you hear the story down the road, and you go, man, I had no idea that just that little thing would have an impact on somebody. I didn't know that. Yeah. At the moment you needed $50 and I gave it to you, that was the biggest $50 that you ever needed. Or if I helped you out of a circumstance by buying you breakfast when you knew you couldn't even come and pay for breakfast. Those things are just, I love the stories that come of it. And yeah, I don't always know what happens. I don't care. I mean, I'm not going to go track down what my ROI was on my generosity. That's not really interesting to me. But when I hear the stories and I see people being impacted by that, or myself, even myself being impacted by others' generosity to me, I just I find myself like, yeah, it's totally worth it. Yeah. There's nothing. It's cliche, like you don't take it with you, that kind of stuff. But that really is true. You're not going to take it with you, but what you will. Others will take what they remember of you with them. Yeah. And your children will, and their children will, and their children will. That thing that comes along by living life like that, that's the stuff that, I mean, how would you ever replace that for what you might have in your bank account? It isn't, they're not in the same story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so inspiring, man. Yeah. And if you're listening to this, Aaron really does live this way. Him and his wife really live this way. And I've been on the receiving end of a lot of your generosity, and I'm just so thankful for you and seeing the way that you've just invested in so many different people. And it's inspiring. It inspires me to want to, go after things and be successful in business and have money so that I can be on that end of being generous and giving and just seeing how you've impacted so many people through that is really cool. And so thank you for being that model and just for taking your time to be with us today. Just really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, same, John. It's just been, I have a lot of admiration for you and your family and your brothers. I mean, it's just the stuff you guys go out and try and attempt at is always, it's fun for me to watch. Because I'm older than you guys, but I like to see ambitious people trying to do things and trying to make their way in this world by being in the same vein. We're not the same people, but I'm certainly within the same vein of spirit of like, how do you do this? And how we're all pursuing something that's important. And I appreciate your friendship, and it's always fun to be together. I love playing music with you. I mean, it's just all, it's just it's a great thing.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you. Is there any way we can support you as a community here on the podcast? Anything going on in your life that you'd like to share about, or any way we can support you?
We're in the middle of a move, and some of that's about teenage boys and trying to figure out how to navigate that in this world. It's a challenge to be a dad of teenage kids. It's especially teenage men. The world's after those boys, and it's tough. It's tough to watch that sometimes. It's tough to be a part of that and see that out in front of you. But that's also part of, like, that's how we keep getting better as people. We have those challenges and then we try to wrestle with them. And so, yeah, that's one thing that's always kind of at the top of my list, and the heaviness of my heart is just for my kids. I think this place gets darker by the minute, and I hope that they can find their way through it and navigate through it with good skills.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, if you're listening to this and you're a person of faith or someone who prays, go ahead and lift Aaron and his family up, support him that way, especially for him taking his time to be on the show with us. So anyway, that'll be it for today. Aaron, thanks for joining, man. Always a pleasure.
It's great. Lots of fun.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. See ya.
Thank you for tuning in to the Intentional Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and leave a rating and review. If you are someone who is looking to take your life to the next level, accelerate your success, and live more intentionally, I would love to help. Shoot me a text at 970-430-6085, and we can schedule a time to meet to discuss your vision and your goals. Again, that is 970-430-6085. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, build a life that matters by living intentionally.